Hello and thanks for checking out this episode of Into the Killing. If it's your first episode, we really hope you find it interesting and you go back and listen to our older episodes. If you've been listening for a while now, we want to say a big thank you for listening and for your support. In today's episode, we'll discuss two cold cases that were solved thanks to an innovative forensic tool. It's unclear when the tool was first used to solve a cold case, but one of the most notable early cases happened on December 15, 1995. On that day, the movie Jumanji was released. Jumanji would go on to be number one at the box office in its first week, knocking off Pixar's Toy Story, which had enjoyed a 3-week reign at the number one spot. The top song was One Sweet Day by Mariah Carey and Boyz II Men. But that day wasn't a sweet one for 17-year-old Krystal Beslanowitch, who lived in Salt Lake City, Utah. It's believed that sometime between 6 and 8 p.m., Krystal was beaten to death with some rocks. Her body was found the next morning. Two ranchers came across it on the banks of the Provo River, not far from Midway, Utah. Her killer had struck her with several rocks 8 or 9 times. Her face was unrecognizable. It's not believed that she was sexually assaulted. Close to her body were some bloody rocks. Some of the rocks were so heavy it would have taken the killer 2 hands to lift them. The rocks were collected for evidence. What wasn't found around Krystal's body was most of her clothes. Just her socks were found near the body. Krystal's boyfriend had reported her missing the day before her body was found. Krystal had left the motel room where they were staying to go to a convenience store at around 2 a.m., about 16 hours before she was believed to have been murdered. Krystal's boyfriend told the police that Krystal was a sex worker. When she didn't come home, he became worried because a few weeks earlier, on November 23, 1995, a sex worker named Melissa Griggs was found murdered in her car in Salt Lake City. The police never released the cause of death. Griggs' murder was unsolved. So he became worried that Krystal may have been murdered as well, possibly by the same man who killed Griggs. The police interviewed Krystal's boyfriend and learned that she had moved to Salt Lake City from Spokane, Washington 5 months earlier in July. After talking to the boyfriend for a few hours, they eliminated him as a suspect. A detective called Christine's family, who lived in Spokane. Krystal's stepfather said that Krystal had a rough life. She possibly started doing sex work as young as the age of 12. She also supposedly gave birth to a child that was taken away from her. When she was young, she started smoking crack cocaine. Krystal's stepfather said he felt sorry for Krystal because he felt that she never had a chance in hell. Krystal also had a criminal record in Spokane that went back to when she was just 13 years old. She had been charged with assault, drug violations, prostitution, and auto theft. Just over a week after Krystal's body was found, the police said they put hundreds and hundreds of hours into the investigation. However, they didn't have a suspect. They also didn't think that Krystal's murder was connected to the murder of Melissa Griggs. One of the biggest problems was Krystal's high-risk lifestyle. They have no idea how she came across her killer. He may have been a previous client who lured her into his vehicle. Or she may have scheduled a rendezvous with a client and didn't tell her boyfriend. Or she decided to find a client while she was out. It was also possible that being a sex worker had nothing to do with her murder, and she was kidnapped by a stranger who saw her walking alone. So the case eventually went cold. The brutality of the murder haunted the investigators, so it was not forgotten. In 2008, forensic swabs of the rocks were taken, and a partial DNA sample of a male was found. But there was not enough DNA to find a match. Then in May 2012, a private crime lab in Salt Lake City used a recently purchased tool on 2 of the rocks. The tool is called an MVAC. It was developed by Dr. Bruce Bradley, a microbiologist, in 2002. The MVAC was initially created to suck bacteria off food. It also preserves collected pathogens in a liquid so they can be used in lab analysis. Dr. Bradley's son described the MVAC to his friend, who was an FBI agent. The agent thought that the tool would be incredibly helpful when it came to collecting forensic evidence. So they did a few tests and they were impressed by the findings. Compared to traditional cotton swabs, the MVAC collected 40% more DNA from saliva on polyester and 88% more from a bloodstain on nylon fabric. The crime lab used the MVAC on 2 of the bloody rocks found near Krystal's body. They found some touch DNA, which is also known as trace DNA. Touch DNA is small samples of DNA that are left behind by skin cells. Using touch DNA found on the rocks, they were able to create a full DNA profile. It was entered into the FBI's combined DNA index system. In January 2013, they were notified that they had a match. It was the DNA of a 46-year-old man named Joseph Michael Simpson. Simpson was a convicted murderer. On August 9, 1987, Simpson went over to the home of 26-year-old Paul Helminger. Simpson was mad because he wanted Helminger to stay away from his girlfriend. Simpson ended up stabbing him 13 times. In October 1987, Simpson was found guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 5 years to life in prison. Simpson was paroled in April 1995 after serving about 8 years in prison. About 8 months later, 17-year-old Krystal Beslanowitch was murdered. Simpson had not been on the police's radar until his DNA was matched to the crime scene. When Simpson was linked to the murder, he was living with his mother in Sarasota, Florida. The sheriff who initially investigated Krystal's murder traveled to Sarasota because he wanted a fresh DNA sample from Simpson. For 4 days, the sheriff and a detective tailed Simpson. Then they saw him toss away a cigarette butt. They collected the butt and compared it to the touch DNA found on the rock. He confirmed what they suspected. Joseph Simpson had killed Krystal Beslanowitch. Simpson was arrested in September 2013, nearly 18 years after the murder. Joseph Simpson went to trial in September 2016. The trial lasted 2 weeks and the jury deliberated for 4 hours. He was found guilty of aggravated murder. He was sentenced to life without the chance of parole. He is currently serving his sentence in the Central Utah Correctional Facility in Gunnison, Utah. Earlier in this episode, we mentioned the murder of Melissa Griggs, who was killed a few weeks before Krystal. Sadly, her murder remains unsolved. We're just going to take a quick break from this episode to bring you a word from our sponsor, Thrive Cosmetics. Personally, I've never worn makeup, not even eyeliner, back in my punk emo days, but I love Thrive Cosmetics. My wife and my administrative assistant have been using the products for some time now, and they both love them. They were initially attracted to Thrive Cosmetics because their products are never tested on animals. They are Leaping Bunny and PETA certified as 100% vegan and cruelty-free. But not only that, they have an amazing mission that is bigger than beauty. For every product purchase, Thrive Cosmetics donates to help women thrive. This includes survivors of domestic abuse, women emerging from homelessness, and women who are fighting cancer. I love both of these aspects because why should animals suffer so that people can be beautiful? And I also love that they are helping women who could really use the help. Plus, from what I've been told, their products are outstanding. My wife adores the Brilliant Eye Brightener. She says it's easy to apply and it brightens your eyes, so it looks like she's had a good night of sleep, even if she hasn't. It's available in 13 universally flattering shimmering shades. My wife also can't get enough of the Define Gravity Eye Lifting Cream. She thinks of it as beauty sleep in a bottle. It softens, soothes, and moisturizes the skin and instantly reduces the appearances of dark circles and puffiness. She thinks that instantly makes her look younger, and I agree. I love everything about Thrive Cosmetics. They have amazing products, and their bigger than beauty mission is truly inspiring. I think you're going to love Thrive Cosmetics as well. Visit thrivecosmetics.com/listed for 15% off your first order. That is an exclusive offer you can only get here. That's Thrive, CAUSEMETICS.com/listed for 15% off your first order. thrivecosmetics.com/listed. The other case we're going to talk about today also happened in Salt Lake City, but it happened 18 years earlier in December 1977. 1977 was a massive year for science fiction movies. Star Wars was released that year, and it was the biggest film of the year. On December 4th, 1977, it was number 1 at the box office, even though it had opened months earlier in May. The number 1 song was the pop song You Light Up My Life by Debbie Boone. It was its 9th consecutive week at the top spot. In early December 1977, 16-year-old Sharon Schollmeyer was living in an apartment by herself in Salt Lake City. Sharon was an independent young woman. She got a job and moved out on her own when she was just 15. Sharon didn't love the apartment where she was living because she didn't feel comfortable with the other tenants. Also, a few weeks earlier, she had been robbed. But she ultimately decided to wait until her lease was up and then move out. On December 5th, 1977, Sharon didn't show up for work, so her employer called her mother. Her mother went to her apartment building, and the building manager let her into her apartment. He stood in the living room while Sharon's mother searched the apartment. She made a horrifying discovery in the bathroom. In the bathtub, which was filled with about half a foot of water, was the nude body of her 16-year-old daughter. Sharon had been blindfolded with a scarf, and her halter top had been shoved into her mouth as a gag. The building manager called 911. The medical examiner determined that Sharon had most likely been raped. Then she was strangled and suffocated to death. Unfortunately, the police didn't have any suspects, and it wasn't long before the case went cold. Over 30 years went by, and the world changed drastically. Luckily, during those 3 decades, forensic science had advanced as well. Also, the MVAC was invented. In September 2013, the police used the MVAC on the halter top that was stuffed into Sharon's mouth. It had been nearly 36 years since Sharon was murdered. Amazingly, using the MVAC, they were able to get enough DNA to create a male DNA profile. It was then entered into CODIS. Initially, a match was not found. Then, just over 3 years later, in December 2016, the police learned that a match had been found. It was the DNA of a 58-year-old man named Patrick McCabe. McCabe's DNA was in CODIS because he had been convicted of sexually assaulting a minor in 1999 in Gilchrist, Florida. The investigators in Salt Lake City were aware of McCabe, but not because he was a criminal. Instead, he was the building manager of Sharon's building. He had let Sharon's mother into her apartment, and he waited in the living room while her mother looked around. He was also the person who had called 911. When the police learned of the DNA match, McCabe was living in Bell, Florida. In early 2017, the investigators traveled to Bell and interviewed him. They confronted him with the DNA evidence, and he confessed. At the time of the murder, he was 20 years old. He explained that when Sharon's apartment got broken into, he changed her locks, and he kept an extra key for himself. He said that he came home on December 4th and he was in the mood for sex, but his girlfriend was asleep. So he went to Sharon's apartment and picked up a knife. He then went into her bedroom, tied her up, and raped her. McCabe said that afterward he realized what he had done and he felt like he had to kill her. He brought her into the bathroom where he strangled her and drowned her. Patrick McCabe ended up accepting a plea deal. In April 2017, nearly 40 years after Sharon Schollmeyer's murder, Patrick McCabe pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and aggravated burglary. The prosecution ended up dropping the charges of aggravated sexual assault. In June 2017, McCabe was given 2 consecutive sentences of 5 years to life in prison. Sharon's family said that they were satisfied with the sentence. They said that ever since the murder, their lives have been shrouded with dark clouds, but McCabe's arrest has allowed some sunlight to shine through. They are just happy he won't be able to hurt another young person. They also thought he was a complete psychopath for standing in the living room of the woman he had killed while letting her mother find the body. At the time of this recording, 64-year-old Patrick McCabe is incarcerated at the same prison where Joseph Simpson is serving his sentence, the Central Utah Correctional Facility in Gunnison. No parole date for McCabe is currently listed, but he'll have to stay in prison until he's served at least 10 years. So he'll have to stay in prison until at least 2026 when he'll be 70. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. Our producer, fact checker, and sound designer was Nell Cloutier. If you just discovered this podcast, you should check out our YouTube channel. We have about 325 videos featuring bizarre but true crime stories. You can find it at youtube.com/criminallylisted. But that's all for this week. Thank you so much for listening. Please stay safe and take care of yourself.